Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into the world of steampunk.
Exciting.
It really is. And you, our amazing listeners, you've sent in some really cool stuff for this deep dive.
I was going to say, it's a fascinating collection of sources.
It is. We've got, let's see, some really in-depth academic papers, some really evocative illustrations. Someone even sent in a whole pamphlet on steampunk fashion.
It's clear there's a lot of passion for this topic.
Definitely. So our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to really get under the hood of steampunk. What it is, where it came from, how it's kind of snuck into everything. Books, movies, even music. I'm looking at you, steam-powered giraffe.
They do make quite an impression, don't they?
They do. Okay, so where do we even start? One of the excerpts you sent in, it gives us a pretty good definition. It says, steampunk is, and I quote, a subgenre of science fiction that incorporates retrofuturistic technology and aesthetics inspired by 19th century industrial steam-powered machinery.
Catchy.
Right. Well, it gets the gears turning, I'll give it that. But I feel like we've all seen the gears and the goggles and the top hats, but it seems like there's got to be more to it than just that, right?
Oh, absolutely. That definition, it gives us the basics for sure. But there's a phrase in there that I think is really key. It talks about what people in the 19th century might have envisioned.
Okay, so not just straight up historical reenactment with gears glued on.
Got it. Exactly. It's about capturing that sense of wonder that people back then felt as technology was advancing so rapidly, what they thought the future might hold.
So it's like retrofuturism.
Bingo.
Using the past to imagine these totally new worlds and possibilities. And speaking of the past, there's this timeline in one of these articles, and honestly, something about it kind of blew my mind.
Oh, what's that?
The term steampunk itself. It's way more recent than I thought it would be.
More recent than Jules Verne, you mean?
Way more recent, 1987, recent. We're talking Jules Verne writing about submarines before the American Civil War, and yet the actual word steampunk doesn't show up until, well, pretty recently.
It is fascinating how a genre can exist for so long before anyone gives it a name.
Right. And it's not just Verne. The timeline also mentions the Steam Man of the Prairies, 1868. This idea of messing around with history, imagining these alternative technologies, it's clearly been around for ages.
Definitely. It really makes you think about why this whole retrofuturism thing is so appealing, There's just something about those eras when technological change seemed to promise, a brighter future.
A better tomorrow, powered by steam. I love it. It's like this weird mix of nostalgia for a time that never really was, but with the excitement of, endless possibilities. You know what I mean?
It's a potent combination, that's for sure. It's what makes steampunk so unique.
Speaking of unique, these illustrations you sent in are amazing.
Aren't they incredible?
The detail in that Nautilus engine room, stunning. And that one, the aerial rotating houses. Who thinks of that stuff?
I love seeing how people in the past envisioned the future. Sometimes they were surprisingly accurate, and other times
way off,
to say the least.
But looking at these, it really hits me how important the visuals are to steampunk. But is it all just gears and goggles, or is there more to it than that?
It's definitely more nuanced than just those elements, although they certainly have their place. It's really about a whole aesthetic, Art Nouveau, those intricate machines, and a fusion of Victorian and industrial elements. But even that doesn't cover it.
Oh, so it gets wilder.
Oh, much wilder. You'll find fantasy, horror, even post-apocalyptic stuff thrown in there. It all depends on what kind of story you're telling.
Now, it's visually diverse, even if those core elements are always there.
Exactly. It's about creating a whole world, an atmosphere. And that's something steampunk does incredibly well. And it's not just limited to visuals either. We'll get into that later. And these where things get really interesting, when we start to look at where this aesthetic, this whole world actually shows up. Because our intrepid listeners sent in some great examples from all kinds of media.
We did get a ton of variety. Okay, so literature, obviously, right? Jules Verne, all that. But then more modern authors, too.
Oh, tons. Philip Reeve with the Mortal Engines series. Have you read those?
I haven't, actually.
Oh, you'd love them. Giant moving cities, amazing characters. He's got this knack for creating these post-apocalyptic worlds that still manage to feel, hopeful somehow.
Interesting. So even with all the gears and the grime, there's still that optimism, that sense of
possibility. Totally. It's like even when things are rough, people find a way. Speaking of finding a way, there's Scott Westerfield, his Leviathan series. It's steampunk, but with genetically engineered beasties.
Okay, you had me at genetically engineered beasties. See, now those are the mashups that get me fired up about steampunk. It's like, not afraid to mix things up, Borrow from here, add a little from there.
It's true. There's a real anything goes attitude when it comes to steampunk. And that extends to other media, too. We got some great examples of movies and TV shows.
Oh, yeah. There was The Wild Wild West, which I'll admit I haven't actually seen.
Really, it's a classic. A bit campy, maybe, but super fun. And then there's Castle in the Sky, the Miyazaki film.
Oh, I've seen that one.
So good.
Visually, absolutely incredible. And that whole floating city, totally steampunk. Okay, I'm seeing an interesting theme here. Airships, flying cities. Is there something about steampunk and, like, the desire to take to the skies?
That's a good question. I wonder if it connects to that idea of progress, of pushing boundaries. The sky's the limit, literally.
I like it. And, okay, what about music? Someone mentioned Steam-Powered Giraffe earlier, but what even is steampunk music?
You know, that's one people always ask. It's almost like steampunk is so visual, right? But the music scene, it's actually incredible. It's like take your brass instruments, add some industrial sounds, maybe some folk melodies, and bam, you've got steampunk.
It's like a genre fusion.
Totally. Abney Park, they were mentioned in one of the articles. They're a great example. But it goes way beyond that. There's this whole DIY ethos in the steampunk community. So you've got people building their own instruments, modifying existing ones.
Wow, so even within the music, that focus on craftsmanship, on, like, making things, it's not just about listening, it's about creating. That's really cool. Okay, I gotta ask, with all this talk about movies and music and books, is there anything that hasn't been steampunkified?
It's a fair question, and the answer might surprise you. But before we get to that, let's talk about how this whole thing, this aesthetic movement, goes way beyond just like consuming media. There's an entire subculture built around it.
Okay, yeah, the fashion, right, the conventions. Someone even sent us a picture of a steampunk-themed nightclub.
Right. It's next level. People are really living this, you know. And that's where we get into some really fascinating questions about what it means to be part of a subculture, or even a superculture, as one article called it.
A superculture. That's a new one.
I know, right? This idea that it's not just about steampunk itself, but it draws on all these other influences: goth, cyberpunk, neo-Victorian aesthetics.
It's like a melting pot of alternative culture.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, I think, because it makes you wonder, what is it about steampunk at its core that draws people in so powerfully?
It's like, it's more than just a hobby, right? It's like this whole identity thing.
It really is. And it makes you think about, like, the context of it all. You know, we're talking late 20th century, the digital age is kicking off.
Right, right.
Big changes happening, kind of like the Victorian era that inspires steampunk. And with that comes this undercurrent of anxiety, right? Are we losing something in all this rush towards progress?
That resonates for sure.
And that's where steampunk comes in, I think. It's celebrating craftsmanship, community, this more like tangible technology, a reaction to the digital maybe.
Interesting. We were talking about Philip Reeve earlier, the Mortal Engines books. And you mentioned that even though it's this post-apocalyptic world, there's still this hopefulness to it.
Exactly. It's like even when the world's gone kind of nuts, people still have this drive to connect, to build something better.
Very steampunk. It's like using the past to, I don't know, to fix the present, maybe.
Or at least imagine a different way forward. Totally. And that connects to something else we were talking about, that idea of steampunk being a, quote, rebellion against the digital tyranny of the present.
Whoa, strong words.
Right. But there's a truth to it, this pushback against being just a face in the digital crowd.
And that's reflected in so much of it, right? The fashion, the music, heck, even the maker movement feels kind of connected to that. People building their own stuff, taking control back from the big tech overlords.
100%. It's about taking those tools, those ideas, and making them your own.
Empowering. Okay, so we've talked about the visuals, the literature, the music, even the fashion, and then this whole subculture aspect of it. I gotta say, diving into this, I'm seeing steampunk in a whole new light.
Me too. It's so much more than just gears and goggles, isn't it?
Way more. It's this reflection of, like, our anxieties, yeah, but also our hopes. This desire to create, to connect, to find something real.
And to have fun doing it. Let's not forget that part. The costumes, the gadgets, the music. It's all about embracing that sense of playfulness.
Absolutely. Well said. So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, I feel like we've barely scratched the surface of what steampunk is all about.
There's always more to discover.
Always. But hopefully our listeners now have a better sense of, you know, the gears within the machine, so to speak.
The why behind the wow.
Exactly. Why this thing, this movement, this aesthetic, whatever you want to call it, why it resonates so strongly with so many people.
And why it continues to grow and evolve.
Right. So, to our amazing listeners, as you continue your own explorations into the world of steampunk, here's a question to ponder. If steampunk is all about using the past to reimagine the future, what does its growing popularity say about us? About our hopes and anxieties in this digital age? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of steampunk. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those gears turning.